Okay, I am Valbona and I live in Albania. It's a country in the southern Eastern Europe. My first slide, as you can see, that is also an introduction, is a kind of background from the country where I come from. Albania is a post-communist country, which is still striving to recover the 50-year-long regime consequences. There is still a transition area from the 1990s till the present days. And it's very strongly related to the education policy makers in my country. A lot of educational reforms have been introduced, and most of them have been borrowed from foreign countries, and they have been applied here without actually foreseeing what kind of consequences would affect the Albanian education system. As a country that is rushing toward European integration, Albania is still trying to make a lot of reforms, mainly in pre-university system. Consequently, we present a lot of reports to the European Commission and European Council, and we are kind of monitored on how education system works in Albania, or at least what kind of advantages are we approaching in order that we embrace the European Integration Union. The latest one has been introduced only in February, on the 23rd February 2022. The problem that is outlined in this paper is that education system in Albania is still not consistent, undergoing too many reforms and borrowing and employing many international practices, mostly not coherent to the traditional education system. There have been a lot of changes in school curricula, teaching programs, study books, training teachers, etc. As English language is seen as a priority in my country, and in most of cases it has always been on the focus on great strategies in my country, strategies that are deriving from governmental bodies, and sometimes even from the Council of Ministers in my country would be involved in making a strategy for education system. This is all about running and rushing toward European integration. For example, the National Strategy for Pre-University Education, the 2009 to 2013, and the other one from 2014 to 2020, they have all foreseen that the English language, which will be the focus in the study, is considered to be studied throughout the whole curricula, through the pre-education system, which starts from the kindergarten till higher education. This means that a child, since a very young age, from 5 years old, until he becomes an adult, which is 18 and over 18, and until he finishes graduation studies, which is at about 22, 23, throughout all his life, and these years of study, he or she has to take English studies in the school, at least in the formal school curricula. Furthermore, the changes that have happened related to the English language have predicted that English language becomes an obligatory, a mandatory test for the A levels. So it used to be only 2 or 3 science subjects during, let's say, the 90s in my country. But with the passing of the years, the English language has become obligatory also for acceptance, for admissions to university courses that the students would choose for their future. Now, the topic of my study, my project, is about attitudes. So because English language has become so important. Now, let's consider and let's give some focus to what the students' attitudes would be towards learning it. So how important is the environmental education where the language is taught for them? So how successful would that be in order to affect the students' attitudes? I have chosen to study the attitudes of students because they investigate two important subscales. And these two important subscales that show and affect actually attitudes of high school students, because the focus, the sample size in this study are going to be high school students or upper secondary students, would be the evaluation for the English class, so where the English is taught and learned basically, and evaluation for the English teacher. But in order to do this evaluation and related to these great changes that have happened in my country, I needed also to consider the environmental educational context where English is learned. That's why I have put under focus in the study three kind of groups of schools, which are urban public high school, so schools in the city, high schools in rural areas, still being public, and non-public high schools, which are only based or found in the cities. So in order to find the attitudes of high school students, we need to see also the differences that occur. How do they feel towards these kinds of schools? So do the schools make any difference, or they do not have any slightest impact to their attitudes? I have actually prepared many slides, but I will try to tie up and to make it rather more rigid, my presentation, and focus mostly on the methodology and the results, because as I can see, my time is running out due to also the previous presentation, which I enjoyed really a lot as being an instructor of English language myself. And I would have made a lot of questions to the previous speaker because I really enjoyed that. But now I have to go on with my presentation and go immediately through the methodology, actually, which will introduce the research questions. And the first one is, what are the attitudes of students toward learning English language in formal education context in public and non-public high schools in urban and rural areas? And these attitudes are going to be studied according to the subscales for evaluation of English teacher and evaluation for the English class. Now, the study is a quantitative study, which means that there were preceded or processed a lot of statistical analysis. For the first question, the analyses that were performed were for the frequencies and the descriptive statistics. The second question is, are there any differences of student attitudes among the three groups of schools? With a dependent variable, which is going to be attitudes, and with the analysis of a two-way ANOVA procedure for the comparison between the groups. In order that we find if there are any differences of attitudes among the schools, the groups of schools, the post-Hoc Tukey HSD procedure was conducted, and it introduces the sum of squares, the degrees of freedom, the distribution, the F value, the level of its significance, which is set at 0.05. And all of these are going to show us what is the difference of attitudes among students between the groups of schools. First of all, I have to say that the test that was conducted in this study, that was presented to the high school students, that actually were a number of 1,800 students, which is big representative sample out of the whole population of high school students in Albania, which I can show you that is 3,400. Sorry, you can hear my little baby crying out of the door. Anyhow, this sample of presentation was considered as representative for this population of high school students in Albania. It turned out from a random selection of the sample that there were 1,144 students from urban public high schools, 440 students from rural public high schools, and 242 students from non-public high schools. Of course, the number is dependent on the whole population of the group of schools, total population of groups of schools. Before performing the instrument, which is attitude motivation test battery, from the founder of the test, from, let's say, the father of inventing the test 60 years ago, in the 60s actually, Robert H. Gardner. He is famous for performing many studies, not only for founding, creating, inventing the test that was first introduced in the 50s and 60s, but also during all of the decades of his life, he has performed many analyses with these standard tests, also in Europe. But in Albania, in my country, it was the first time that it was applied. And I had also to take permission from the author of the test, which he very happily granted to me and gave permission to use in my country. All this preliminary statistical data show that I could use the test in my country. So the test resulted that was 77% reliable. And not only, but the alpha coefficient for the preliminary data test showed that it was 88% trustworthy. So the test could be applied in these sample size that I had selected for my project. Also, in order that we give answer to the second question, which is the two-way ANOVA procedure, which is rather more complicated than the first one, which asks only for finding out what the frequencies and descriptive data is. For the dependent variable of attitudes, the comparison between schools, I needed to proceed with the Levany test for homogeneity of variances, which show that the dependent variable is homogeneous because the statistical significance for the variable of attitude was p equal to 0.35, thus showing that it was bigger than 0.05. So creating all the necessary basis to apply the two-way ANOVA procedure. Now, about the results. The test had scores from 1 to 3, which indicated negative attitudes towards the language, while the answers from 4 to 6 indicated positive attitudes in a Likert scale from 1 to 6, where there was no neutral value. The mean value for the whole scale of attitudes, which means the behavior, the attitudes of the students towards learning English, was a mean value, M, as you can see, M equals to 4.28, and the standard deviation equals to 0.85. The mean value, 4.28, shows that the students had positive attitudes towards learning English, which means positive attitudes towards the English class and the English teacher. However, these were not very high. As you can see, the highest scale is 6. Now, the frequencies for the variable of attitudes show that only, I can show in percentage, only 1% of the students absolutely disagree or have absolutely negative attitudes towards the English class or the English teacher. Only 1.7% of them moderately disagree that they have good attitudes to the English class or the English teacher. And 16.9% of them had slight negative attitudes. As we can see, all the rest, which is at a level of 35.7%, have slight positive attitudes. 42.2% have moderate favorable attitudes, and only 3.5% of them have absolutely positive attitudes, which is the upper scale, the most favorite scale for evaluating the English class and the English teacher. Now, if we can see separately the subscales for the whole big scale of attitudes, we would check out that the mean value for the scale evaluation of the English teacher is 4.3, which is a good evaluation, a moderate evaluation, but it's not very high. And evaluation for the English language class is only 4.1%, which shows that it's rather lower. So as we can see, the students have more favorable attitudes toward the English teacher rather than the whole English class. Now, let's pass to the second question, which is about the group comparison of attitudes according to the groups of schools. First of all, we checked if there is a significance of comparison, a statistical significance, so that we can interpret the data gathered. And we can see that there is a significance level, and the last column shows that it's 0.000, which is lower than 0.5%, which is the established rate of significance in this project, in this study, in this research. Because we had a very reliable significance result, then the post-Hoc Tukey HSD comparison procedure indicated that there existed a difference for urban public high schools and rural public high schools, which is very low. It's equal to 0.19161. Imagine only 0.1, which is very, very, very low. The difference for urban public high schools and non-public schools is almost zero, as you can see from the data given there. And the p-value is equaling to 1. For the rural public high schools and non-public high schools, the difference is minus 0.1 for etc. As you can see, these differences are very, very low. The results of the differences are only significant for the groups of schools, public high schools in the city and the public high school in the village or in the rural area, because the p-value is 0.0 and it's lower than 0.05. So finally, I can say that a comparison made between the schools, and if we consider the discussion of Albanian students and Canadian high schools, we can see that in my study and in the study of Gardner, Masgoret, Tennant, and Mihit of 2004, similarities were found in the fact that both studies show that students have positive attitudes. However, in Albania, the mean value, which means the attitudes of students, were rather lower than in Canadian high schools. Also, in comparison to Spain, the mean values are also positive, but in Albania are higher than in Spain. As you can see, the values vary from 3.9 to 4.05. Also, another comparison made from Albanian high schools and in the surrounding countries, neighboring countries like Greece is, we can see that the results in Greece are lower compared to Albania. Also, another neighboring country would be Hungary by a study of Nikolov in 2001. And in both studies, there were found positive attitudes. So they go in line with the study conducted in Hungary. But in Hungary, it was found that high school students learn foreign languages, had positive attitudes toward foreign languages, especially very positive ones toward German and English. From the distant studies, examples from Lebanese schools, were found that students' attitudes were negative towards traditional way of teaching in a study from Zainol and Mohammadi and 2012. So we see that not all the times the attitudes are positive. In conclusion, I would say, because I see we have run out of time, actually, it was found that school groups divided by demography, and public and non-public criteria have a small impact on high school students' attitudes toward learning English language in a formal context. This means that the kind of school, the school type, the school group would not affect students' attitudes toward learning English, toward evaluating the English class, and toward evaluating English teacher. Generally, students had very positive attitudes toward these ones, but not at the utmost scale to the highest evaluation, which was absolutely agree as a Likert scale to the study. My key reference support to the research is always Gardner RC 2001, Gardner Robert 2004 International Attitude Motivation Test Battery, a research project conducted throughout the world and very lately in Albania. 2005 Integrative Motivation and Second Language Acquisition, and also 2009 Gardner and Lambert, which has also made a 50-year and counting sum up of his whole studies. Thank you very much. If you have any questions, I would be very happy to listen.
Thank you.